Hello everybody, welcome to Dakman Productions and welcome to Conahey Rail, the home of Conrail. And today we're going to do a Penn Central run. Ooh, Penn Central. Just the name itself can trigger model railroaders to go off the deep end. Especially if you're a Pennsylvania Railroad fan or a New York Central Railroad fan. Even to this day, it seems like sometimes you still run into people who do not like Penn Central. Penn Central was formed in 1968. It was a merger between Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York Central, and the government sort of like said, okay, we'll let you merge, but you have to take on New Haven as well into the merger. And so there was a lot of things that went wrong. That was like a merger made for disaster. Oh, I can't help but laugh. So what happened with Penn Central? Well, from what I've read, and you can put in the comments if I'm wrong, but I did some research and there's conflicting stories and stuff, so I'm just going to generalize what I've seen and try and make some sense out of this. But seems like Penn Central, from what I've read, was formed between New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad. They were actually arch rivals. They did not get along with each other. They hated each other's guts. Pennsylvania Railroad was looking to merge with somebody, and at first it was not. They were not considering New York Central, but Pennsylvania Railroad wasn't actually making a profit, but they weren't losing, and they wanted to partner up with somebody to try and get their financials back on track again. New York Central was making money, but not as much as they wanted, so they were looking to partner up or merge with somebody to make even more money. Well, these two railroads get together and they want to merge, and the government says, okay, you got to take New Haven too. Well, New Haven was already bankrupt. It was failed. So you're taking on a failed railroad, and then you're taking on a railroad that hasn't shown a good profit in a couple years. So, and then you're taking on, you're partnering up two railroads they hate each other. The New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad hated each other so much, they would put tracks next to each other's tracks. So if New York Central had track work going in from point A to point B, and Pennsylvania Railroad, seeing that they were doing pretty well with it, they would lay down tracks. The same way the other end. If Pennsylvania Railroad had tracks from A to B, New York Central would see that they were doing well, they would put tracks next to that. So they actually had duplicate trackage. So they were trying to steal each other's delivery services, basically. In my opinion, the first problem that Penn Central had is when they merged New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad, they didn't trim any of the fat. They kept everything. They kept all the duplicate trackage. They kept all the employees. Sometimes in business you have to make decisions, especially if you're merging or starting off a new company, you got to trim the fat, and they didn't do that. Next thing you know, within 2 years are already starting to sink. That fast, yes. And so the failure of Penn Central was the biggest bankruptcy in the United States until Enron in the 80s. And one of the things that I read about Penn Central is that they did one last ditch effort to get shareholders to put even more money into the stock by showing profits that they weren't really making. And that put a sour taste in a lot of shareholders. Now when the Penn Central finally did claim bankruptcy. So, like I said, by 1970, Penn Central was already starting to fail. In 1974, Penn Central thought it was a good idea to make a video asking the government for money. So they wanted to show how bad a shape the railroad was in. And this video actually exists on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the description of the Penn Central asking the government for funds video. So it shows the railroad cars are rocking back and forth pretty violently because the track work is in such bad shape. Also, they explain how they have freight cars out of service because of repairs they can't afford to make on them. The locomotives are falling apart because they haven't maintained them, and because they were pouring all the money into paying the payroll and the shareholders, and there was really nothing left over for the maintenance. Penn Central rail cars were in such bad shape they couldn't go and get the products that they needed to get, like the steel mills. Their gondolas were in such bad shape, falling apart. They had to turn away the steel mills. They couldn't service the steel mills like they should have. There was a lot of short line railroads that were suffering because Penn Central couldn't interchange with them because they were falling apart. And this was leading up to a big catastrophic break in the supply chain, and the government seen that, so they got involved. And by 1976, the government's had enough and said, we're taking you over with Conrail. But Penn Central is a name that even the model railroad manufacturers were afraid to make over the years, because there was a lot of people that hated Penn Central so bad. And I would have to say, within the last 4 or 5 years, there have been modelers looking for Penn Central stuff for their railroad. I mean, let's face it, Penn Central was a butt of a lot of jokes out there, memes and stuff. Like, let's say I derailed my train, and somebody, was standing there, might say, hey, you pulled a Penn Central and made a derailment, because Penn Central is well known for derailing trains. Because in that video that Penn Central made to show the government they were in bad shape, it shows boxcars jumping the tracks and falling off of it. So yeah, when something derails, the butt of the joke is, oh, you pulled a Penn Central. Or if your track work wasn't right, well, who made that? Who put that track together? Penn Central? Yeah, it's like, and so you'll even see people, have, sometimes they'll make memes or stuff around their own railroads making fun of Penn Central. Today you'll still find people who absolutely hate Penn Central. One of the club members on the DC High Railers, he absolutely hated the Penn Central. He said when he was going to school, he remembered Penn Central. The trains were always breaking down or derailed, and they would actually have to sometimes climb through the trains that are derailed or broke down to get to school, because they were blocking up the roads and stuff where they had to cross. And he was actually glad that Conrail took over Penn Central. But yeah, there's still people out there who hate it, but there's people out there also now looking for it. There's people looking for Penn Central. It is a part of history, whether you like it or not. Sometimes I just laugh about, some of the stuff that they did. But, if it wasn't for Penn Central, I always said if it wasn't for Penn Central, there never would have been a Conrail. So I'm so glad Penn Central was formed, because Conrail would have never happened if it wasn't for that. I mean, there was other failing railroads, but that was the biggest decision for forming Conrail, was because of Penn Central. But I always wanted to do a Conrail takes over Penn Central train. But before I can do that, I'm going to run a actual Penn Central train. Alright, so today's run is going to be made with a Lionel Legacy Penn Central SD45. And for a double disaster episode, The EMD SD45 had its own issues. It was the first locomotive that EMD produced that had the 20-cylinder diesel engine. So they were trying to up the horsepower by making an engine with more cylinders, because your typical Class 1 locomotive, or your road locomotive as they would call it, had 16 cylinders. However, that engine did suffer from crankshafts cracking and snapping. I did make a video on that as well. When Conrail took over Penn Central number 6235 did retain its original cab number and became Conrail number 6235. On another note, number 6235 through 6239 had been ordered by the Pennsylvania Railroad, but were delivered after the Penn Central merger in 1968. I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, when the Run for Fun comes up, I could ask Harry Henning III if I could do a Penn Central takes over Pennsylvania Railroad. Somehow, I don't think that would go over too well asking them, but I mean, they were nice enough to let me do a Conrail takes over Reading, but I think I'll be pushing it during a Penn Central taking over Pennsylvania. But anyway, here we go. It's 1968, and we're doing our Penn Central run, inaugural run.
This is the dispatcher. Do you copy? I copy that. Over. Okay, start her up. Stand by for track orders. Yes, sir. We'll fire her up. Out. Dispatcher, ready to roll. Can I pull? Over. Negative. Stand by. Over. Copy that. Standing by. Out. Dispatcher here. You're clear to pull. Over. Clear signal. Very good. Out. Dispatcher, out.
Now, I know what everybody's thinking. They're disappointed that there was no fires or derailments or crashes as expected from Penn Central. But, yeah, this is a pretty good run. But you gotta remember the Conrail Master is running this train. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you guys trackside. Goodbye.